Hello, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live event today, where we will be exploring the Whelm Scale. I'm Kyle from Superside, and today I'm joined by Adobe Executive Creative Director, speaker, podcaster, and author Adam Morgan. Adam, it's great to see you again. I had the pleasure of interviewing Adam earlier this year for a content series that at Superside we're calling Creative Thinkers, which will be premiering on YouTube later this month. With that, Adam, I think I got all of your accolades in the intro there.
You don't need to add any more. They're fine. People can
Yeah.
listen to them if they really want to. Yeah, great.
Well, we're not here today to talk about creative thinkers. Today, we're here to explore the Whelm Scale. And with that, Adam, I'll turn it over to you to explain really what that is and why it's so important.
Sure, great. All right, so I'm going to go through a little presentation here. Hopefully you can all see it. There we go. Just to give you a little story about what is this dirty Whelm scale? What are we even talking about? So first I want to start out. Before Adobe, I worked for 19 years at a variety of international ad agencies. And I had one owner of an agency who would always say this comment. He's like, there are employees you need to spur and employees you need to rein in. And every single time I'm going to pick one that I have to rein in, meaning one that's like just super excited and going maybe a little too crazy, maybe going down a path too quickly or down a wrong path, and you need to kind of pull them back and set them straight. So that was his analogy. He was I don't even know what the right term is, a rancher, a horse rider, a wrangler, a something. He owned horses and rode them a lot. And so that was his analogy that he used all the time, of like the difference between some employees who are excited and some employees who need some motivation. For me, I've had a little bit different experience. From my experience of a manager for nearly 20 years, I've seen three different types of responses from creative types. And that's if you come up to them and say, hey, I've got another job here for you, and you kind of want to add something to their workload. These are the three different types of responses that I often got. Number one, you'd get someone who's like, oh, I have so much other stuff already, on top of everything else I have to do. Do you really want me to do that? And they'd be stressed about it. And, they'd always just talk about their current load of like, oh, I've got this and this and this. And it's just too overwhelming. And they just felt super overwhelmed. The second group is like, they'll do it. They'll be like, okay, I'll take it. But they're not happy about it. And they're a little bit grumpy. And maybe some were better at hiding their grumpiness. Others were a little more blatant, but at least, they'd always take it. Whereas the first one, they wouldn't want to take it and they'd push off as much work as they could. So the second group, they'd take it, but then just not be happy about it. And then there was this third group that always, it's like, I didn't even have to come up to them and ask them if they wanted it. They were coming to me asking for more. Hey, can I take on more? Can I take on more? And the reality was the people who were in the third category took on the lion's share of the work. People in the first category actually had much less work than all the others. In the second category, they took a fair amount. They just necessarily didn't have a great attitude about it. So those are the three different types. You may have a different lived experience and, have found other categories, but this is just me as a manager over the years. These are the three different groups that I kind of worked with. So this is the question, then how do you balance the workload? If you've got, one group taking on way too much and still wanting more, you've got another group of people who just don't want any and are pushing it off. And then you look at it and it looks like they have less, than everyone else. How do you balance that? Because as you go up and talk to people, in their minds, they're really stressed out, or they're really overloaded, or they're really, overwhelmed, as I would say it. So here's some ways in the past of how we would try and see, like, okay, how do we balance the workload? First, this is for years and years and years. I get a report every week. Here are all the billable hours for each creative, and you'd look at it and just check and say, okay, so and so is like at really high billable rates. So and so is at low billable rates. We'll give some work to this person, and it was really unreliable because it was based on timesheets, and they were putting in said timesheets, and who knows how much truth was in those timesheets, if they were real or not. And plus billable hour, that's just one data point of looking at it. That didn't give accounting for what types of projects, or maybe they've got a huge, massive project or a whole bunch of little ones, and those aren't necessarily equal in the billable hour world. So number two was weekly meetings with reviewing the lists. So this is the classic way of we all get together every Monday and look at the big job list and go down it all and see who's got 3 projects, who's got 4 projects, and who's got 1 project. And then whoever has the fewest gets more, right? And that didn't really work out either, because the same problems with, the size of projects, whether they're big or small, but then other extenuating circumstances. What other things are going on in their lives? What other things are going on with the business? And so just looking at a list of projects wasn't enough. And I know there's sometimes, even today we do things like story points, and we're trying to, divide up sprints and things. And again, it only is really accounting for projects and the size of projects. And the last one, at least when I was, maybe 10 years ago, this was hailed as like the great solve everything, which is a work management software. And we use it. And I think there are huge benefits to work management software. I mean, first of all, the visibility with stakeholders, knowing where everything's at on the process. You have a lot more granularity and great data on where everything's at, but it still didn't solve the problem of, we only have a big list of projects and assigned to different people and tasks, and you can see the size and the number of tasks, and that's about it. You don't really know all the other extenuating circumstances. So this was where I was dealing with it. The one last point to make here too is that the problem with all of these methods is it's more manager-led than individual-led, meaning manager goes and looks at a big list, manager goes and assesses the amount of work, and then goes to the employees and gives them projects saying, hey, you look light or you look heavy, you need to have more of this and that, rather than how do you have individuals helping manage that so that it's not just one direction? How do they help as part of the process in figuring out the right amount of workload and how to balance it among all the different people? So that's where we land on the Whelm Scale. The Whelm Scale. So what I'm about to show you is an example of the Whelm Scale. And this is really, how do you find where people are, whether they're underwhelmed or overwhelmed, or I like to say perfectly whelmed, right in the middle. And this is a Whelm Scale of when I was at an agency that I built and used as a model, but it's not the only, it doesn't have all of the data points, and they'll be different for your business. So let me just show it, and then I'm going to walk you through exactly what this thing is. So the way it worked is I thought, there are just so many different variables that account for whether someone is busy or overwhelmed or underwhelmed, right? It's not just the number of projects or billable time or any of those things. And so if you look at the far left of this list, and this may be an eye chart, we can send it out later, but I'll just say it out loud so for those who are on small screens. So on the far left, I just have a whole bunch of different things that contribute to busyness. We've got billable time, major deadlines, minor deadlines, big presentations, number of projects, timelines, meetings. Do you even have time for lunch? Do you have any late nights this week? What time are you going home? And this was obviously those circumstances at my one agency. But what I'd encourage you to do is for your team, you can just list all the way down the left, what are all the different things that contribute to either time or busyness or workload or extenuating circumstances that may impact all of your team. And so what I did is I list all those down, and then across the middle on each line, I kind of put a general average range. And this is important. So it's like, if you were to look at the number of major deadlines across all of your team, or the number of projects, or the number of deadlines or big presentations, like think through like, what's the average that seems like a good amount of work? For example, maybe it's 10 projects. You have a lot of little small email, whatever types of projects. So 10 is about the average. That's good. Versus like if all of your projects are massive, maybe it's 3. I don't know what those numbers are. But what you're really trying to do is find what's a balanced load. And then through all of these different criteria, you just kind of figure out what's high, what's low. For example, again, 20 projects might be a little high. 10 to 15 is okay. Maybe on timelines, you have like deadlines, like multiple due this week, versus you have deadlines that are like, you have months to complete it, or it's, I have ads while you wait, meaning it's like due every day constantly. And so what you're really doing is you're really trying to do a net average of all these different touch points to make sure you kind of find what the middle ground is. And then if you look at the scale at the top, obviously if you're near the left, you're underwhelmed. If you're towards the right, you're overwhelmed. And right there in the middle somewhere is this happy, perfectly whelmed. Now, the beauty of this is it's not just a matter of me finding the average and then going through and assigning things. Again, this tool is you go to your team and you have them look at it and let them, they could even help build it with you. But what you're really doing is showing them, here's what everyone is doing and here's what the average is at. So that when you get to those people who are like when I said the 3 different type of people, the first group where they're like, oh, I have way too much and I'm too overwhelmed. And then they look on the list, and if they look at their stuff, they're at a number 1 or a number 2. It'll be a stark contrast with the third type of people who are like wanting more and more and more. And they're always like an 8 or a 9 or a 10, right? It's very obvious for the team to see it because it's transparent. They can see what the average workload is, and then they can see how much workload they're handling, and it'll give them a good indicator of like, okay, I got to step it up. I'm really underperforming here, and it's very obvious. Whereas the overperformer, they'll know they're overperforming. They can see it, and then it's just a matter of how often do they want to live at that level, or how often do they need to go there. Then what I would do is, once the team knows what the average is and what everyone's doing, then on my weekly schedule, I don't have to go through every single time and say, hey, let's look at your list. Let me micromanage your list and see how much you have and how much I need to give you. I'll just go to them and say, in all honesty, how whelmed are you? And if they're like, you know what, I'm good. I'm at a 5 or a 6. That's great. And that way they're kind of self-selecting from the average here of the list of everyone and really putting themselves in the right spot. Now, of course, you'll still have to do some management. You have someone who's like saying, oh, I'm perfectly whelmed, and I'm at a 5. And then you really look into it and they're really living at a 1 or a 2. And then that's just, some management that you need to help them with. But at least it'll give a good indicator. It's a fast way for me to go through the whole team and say, hey, where are we at this week, on a Monday? As before we're, start handing out projects, someone, may indicate that they're good, or someone may be up at a 7 or an 8, or someone's at a 5 or a 3. It's just good and very helpful to know before we start assigning stuff where everyone's at. And beyond this, I mean, you could even put in mental health things like I'm feeling crazy stressed out, or I'm not so stressed out, or I have things going on in my personal life, or I don't. There are other things you can add to the list. And it's really just getting a good indicator from them if they feel like they're averaging out compared to everyone else, and with their own, kind of personal feelings and capacity. So anyhow, that's the Whelm scale. Benefits of it, it's really self-reporting. It's no longer manager-led, me coming in and just kind of looking at reports and saying, hey, you need more work, or hey, you need less, and trying to balance the workload. It's a little more of self-regulation, where I found that as the whole team, if they're aware of where everyone's at and what's going on, then they self-regulate a little bit more and take on a little bit more, or give up a little bit more, just to help it feel more whelmed. It's also great because you get more visibility across the entire team. It's not just, a project list or a billable list. It's your ability to see, okay, who's got major deadlines, or who's stressed, or who's got other problems or issues that we can help balance out as a team. So it's really helpful to see beyond just the standard metrics. And then finally, great for leadership training. It's great for them to see, if you have up and coming leaders, okay, how do I balance, if I'm running the team, how would I balance it? How would I keep everyone happy and busy, but not too overwhelmed, right? How do I make sure all of that is working out? So that's the tool. That's the Whelm scale. Now we can take this off if you want, and we can just start chatting or go through questions. But that's pretty much my crazy idea of how I balanced my workload in my team.
That was fantastic, Adam. And I do have quite a few questions, and I'm sure we'll have some questions come in from the audience as well. The first question that I have for you is, with something like the Whelm scale, it seems to me that the most important thing to start is just making sure that you have transparent, honest, good communication with your team. Do you have any secrets to like fostering that sort of dynamic with your team, where they can come to you openly and say, look, I'm getting burnt out, or look, I need more challenges?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of, transparency starts with openness and very, candid conversations. So I think when you have your team meetings, and just, for me, in having them help out and at least be aware of it and part of it, and then that way they know, all right, now I can at least communicate exactly where I'm at. I think it does help them feel like I really want to know, and I'm not just looking at a project list and trying to check some boxes, but I'm really like digging into other things, like, yeah, how are you feeling? Is there more stuff going on than we don't know about? Let's balance it out and really understand where you're at. And that shows a little bit of a level of caring, I think,
Hmm.
that helps them feel more open to be like, oh yeah, here's what I've got going on, and here's where I'm at, and here's what I feel like, and at least just being a little more open.
Does establishing that environment kind of start with yourself as well? Like, are you very open with your team when it comes to how you're feeling, to sort of like set that precedent that it is okay to talk about that openly?
There have been times I've been called out on my team with that openness where they're like, Adam, I think you're setting a bad example and living at an 8 for too long or a 9 for too
Yeah.
long. Maybe you need to dial it down a little bit. So there's truth around that it is. And you're probably right. Like I may not say that often enough, and it's a good reminder to do that, to just be honest about where you're at. We hear that all the time. The more transparent you can be as a leader, the better, and there's better trust because they know where you're at as well. Whether versus they don't have a lot of insight into all the work that you're doing necessarily because
Right.
you don't have to account to them for it. Um, and so that's not a bad idea of like even showing my whole work list to the team so that
Hmm.
they can see what I've actually got going on, what workload I'm carrying.
And in your last answer, you mentioned like just asking people like, what do you have going on? And obviously, people have things going on outside of work as well. How do you account for the anxiety and stresses that may be due to things happening outside of work?
Yeah, and to be fair, when you get into that level, it's probably not good to be talking about it with the big, huge group on the weekly status call of like, all right, who's stressed out and got like no one's going to admit that.
Right.
That's something you handle in your one-on-ones and just in a private conversation. But um, you're right. And it's a little tricky in today's world where it's like you don't want to pry into personal things, but I think there are easy ways to at least just ask and say, you feel like you're struggling or stressed out. Is there something I can help with? Or and so it's usually in those conversations that we'll find out. And we've had even recently a couple on my leadership team that had some personal things going on that were making things really, really hard, and we didn't talk about that, but we did talk about how we're going to balance it out and then just have others take on a little bit more, and just know, like, when it's this altruistic, you feel a little bit better about taking on a little bit more when you're helping someone out rather than just getting
Mhm.
overloaded for no good reason, right? So
For sure.
yeah.
I think like from my personal experience, it's also something where like you're I find that I can get into these areas of feeling overwhelmed and be okay with it, knowing that those times are going to be sort of few and far between. And I think there might be a parallel here to something that I've learned about cars. Anyone in the chat who knows more about cars than me, which is probably everyone, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it's my understanding that it's good for your engine to take your car out of town every now and then and drive on the highway regularly. Is there that parallel to managing your team in that it's important to push them down the Whelm scale to maybe show them their limits, and push them outside their comfort zone to just show them that they can do that and they can go there if need be?
Oh yeah, in my world, we don't call it a test drive, but we do call it like a stretch assignment.
Okay.
And stretch assignments, I do them even, my manager, boss gives them to me. Anyone who's looking for growth or wanting to expand and learn new skills, whatever it may be, it's absolutely important to have those stretch assignments. And they're not like the day-to-day routine stuff of like if you've got to do a whole bunch of emails or banner ads, whatever. And now this is like the big campaign, right? That comes in every
Right.
once in a while, or the big cool project, or even sometimes, as I've over the years talked with, just people who I manage, it's just talking through, okay, if we're going through your goals and where do you want to get to, if you want to get to this X leadership level, here's some things that we probably need to work on. Maybe I have a whole list of like the 9 steps to becoming a creative director, and would maybe isolate one of those and say, okay, you need to work on presenting and selling. So let's do this stretch assignment where you're going to work on X and go, I guess to your analogy, go for the big drive and work on that. Absolutely, that's necessary. I think now if you're driving freeway all day long, you're going to be at a 10 and you're going to be overwhelmed all the time, right? So that's
Right.
like there was an era of my life, actually probably two. One during the Great Recession of like '09, where it was just like 100-hour work weeks for 3 weeks in a row that were just so bad that, then you're no longer, it's not a healthy thing. So it's like balancing, having a few of those every once in a while. Maybe there's a big event that your company has and it's just going to be all hands on deck for a short while, and that's okay to, to kind of open it up and go. But and then just learning to balance it all, because you don't want to be underwhelmed all the time either. Then that leads to laziness for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So we have our first question from the chat. This one's from John Paul. How would one go about managing people who fall on the extremes of the scale? For example, someone who constantly feels overwhelmed but is sitting below a 5 on the scale on a regular basis, or someone who asks for more but is clearly heading for burnout and is a bit of a people pleaser.
Well, the first thing I would say is have them and you read Radical Candor together. This is what I've done, because that is not an issue of knowing the scale or whatever it is. It's just a matter of having some really tough talks and being very candid. So what's best for them? If you have someone who's underperforming but acting like they're overwhelmed all the time, you need to have some tough conversations with them and really let them know. You can say, look at the scale. The average is here. You're really doing this workload. You're not, at least work-wise, you're not overwhelmed. There may be personal issues or other things. Let's work through those. Let's dig into that. How do we help you? How do we get past that? Because you're awesome. You're very talented, but I've got to balance the team. I can't let you take on fewer projects and everyone else take on more, and then that'll burn them out. So it's like an altruistic thing, but it's some radical candor. What's best for them, and how are you helping them, and in a way that makes them feel helped, not shamed or put down or whatever it is. So that's where I'd start. And the same thing with the overperformer. It's always great to have that employee. Again, back to my old boss. That's one that you have to rein in a little bit rather than spur. And so when you're reining them in a little bit, it's just like, hey, you are awesome. Encourage them. You're great, but we got to point you in the right directions. And if you just keep, burning all night long and you're sleeping at the office just to impress, that may not be getting what you need. So let's talk about how you're going to get good leadership skills, how you're going to partner with other stakeholders, how you're going to, influence the work without just, driving it through with blunt force. So there are ways to guide and lead and help manage them without just letting them go crazy and work their guts out and burn out.
Yeah, to me, it seems like really the key to all of this is creating the understanding that you want to set someone up for sustainable long-term success. And the person who's pushing for more work and really trying to prove themselves, like that seems to be the way to get to a certain level. But once you sort of establish that that's the person that you are, it's going to be harder to change those habits. And you're probably acting on some sort of insecurity that you need to figure out before you can develop really. That if you're the people pleaser, you're always going to be the people pleaser until you solve that sort of thing within yourself. The second part of John Paul's question was, do you have any advice, Adam, regarding personal development and self-management? I'd imagine this is in regards to the Whelm scale. So maybe sort of what you talked about in that you do need to push yourselves or push someone down the Whelm scale for that development on occasion. Can you maybe talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, and first of all, it's important to know what the tool is. The Whelm Scale is not a tool necessarily for self-management. It's mostly designed as a transparent solution to get all of the team on the same page and see what workload is expected and reasonable, and then help them self-manage. Now, that said, it is, maybe it is a decent management tool where I can see, okay, people who are really underperforming all the time on the Whelm scale, they're not going to, I'm not going to promote them necessarily unless some things get fixed. Or someone who's, like we said before, always at a 10, that isn't necessarily the best thing. And so working with them with other issues. So there may be red flags that show up that we can use for management moments with our team. But I'd say with yourself, it's really hard. I'm sure it's probably easy enough if you're doing all the same work as everyone else on your team and you could use that scale. Maybe you want to build one and work with your peers or other leaders to see what they're doing, and then really get a sense for what their Whelm scale is. And then you could really kind of rate yourself against that Whelm scale and see how you relate. Because who knows, what if it's like let's say you work in an agency and the culture is like, if you want to be in leadership, you got to be working at a 10 all the time. Maybe that's what it is. And there are some people who can do that and not burn out and do that for a decade, right? And they're going to end up being in that leadership. So you got to really assess, what is it that I'm really driving toward? And what is, where's my growth at? There are other ways to look for growth and kind of manage yourself and learn. I mean, a lot of it's just reading a ton of great books, or, learning from different webinars like this, and just seeking good advice from other leaders. So it's a tool. I wouldn't say it's the end all, but yeah, there are other ways that you can kind of figure out your path for growth and how you can fix some of your issues. But again, for me, it's mostly just, it's a balancing tool and a way just to get like a quick snapshot of where you're at in any given moment.
Mm-hmm. So I've gotten the warning that we have about 5 minutes left. I'm going to have one more question here. Hopefully we can answer it quickly, and then Adam will send you on your way. So the last question that I had was, how much of it is on the designer versus on the manager to find stimulation and fulfilling creative work, if it's not coming in through the work of the company itself? So, for example, do you think it's important to encourage your team to find creative outlets outside of work, so that they can maintain that creative fulfillment if it's maybe not coming during a project?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've worked at so many different places as a manager, in some agencies where there's not a lot of huge, creative projects. I would have creative workshops. I would have like encourage them to go do freelance, or even just, we'd come up with other projects that could benefit the agency or benefit us in different ways that weren't part of the normal workflow. So absolutely, sharpening the saw is critical. I absolutely believe in that. Now, that's not to say like that someone who needs to sharpen their saw, they get a hall pass on the Whelm scale and they don't have to, carry their load. No, absolutely. We have to balance it out. And maybe it's like, all right, everyone's working at a 5, and then therefore there's enough space for us to all fill in one more fun, kind of creative project, whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm.
But finding passion, keeping your saw sharp, absolutely. Like, and that, who should do that? The manager or the employee? Well, first of all, I think it's got to come from the person. You've got to have your own passion. Again, no one wants to spur a horse. They want to rein one in. So get your passion and figure it out and drive towards something. And then the manager's job is to help facilitate, make connections, create space for you, whatever it may be. But it's not their job to give you passion. Like you've got to find that. So I'd say it's a balance of doing both. But I totally love it. I encourage that anyone who's needing to be more inspired. And that's where I'm like, my job as a manager, I'll have a weekly creative workshop where it's just intended to just 1 hour a week, just to inspire the team and get them all pumped. Great. I can handle that. I can work on the inspiration, and then let them go out and decide, all right, what passion project do I want to start? Or what, how can I take one of my boring projects at work and turn it into something better? That would be even greater for the company.
Well, that sounds like some great homework for both the managers and the employees, I guess, who are tuning into this LinkedIn Live. Adam, thanks so much for joining me today. And for anyone who wants to see more of Adam, he's featured in a guide that we have dropping very soon. So keep an eye out for that on LinkedIn and Superside's other social media. You can also find Adam on LinkedIn, Facebook, all the different platforms. And in a lot of the content that we're actually putting out, including that Creative Thinkers interview that I mentioned at the top of the live. So Adam, again, thank you so much for joining me, and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.